When Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated in the wake of World War I, his youngest son had a nervous breakdown and soon died. Wilhelm's reaction was so disgusting, it's impossible to forget. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the last emperor of Germany. His delicate ego, intense jealousies, and unpredictable temper led straight to the calamitous events of World War I and the fall of the House of Hohenzollern. Frederick Wilhelm Victor Albert, aka Kaiser Wilhelm II, was royally connected from birth. His mother Victoria, Princess Royal, was the eldest child of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. He was himself the eldest of Queen Victoria's staggering 42 grandchildren. But despite his royal lineage and connections, his childhood was anything but pleasant, in part due to his incredibly traumatic birth. Wilhelm had, to put it mildly, a difficult time coming into this world. During his mother's labor, her doctor realized that the baby was in breech position, potentially a death sentence for both her and the baby in those days. Though traumatic for both Wilhelm and his mother, both of them made it through in the end, but they weren't unscathed. When he finally emerged from the birth canal, Wilhelm was eerily silent. Much to the horror of everyone in the room, the blue-lipped young Hohenzollern prince was hypoxic. Desperate to revive the infant, and against the protestations from his parents, the doctor spanked Wilhelm repeatedly until miraculously a weak cry escaped his pale lips. During the difficult delivery, the doctor inadvertently caused irreparable harm to Wilhelm, resulting in a brutal, lifelong deformity. In his efforts to remove the breech baby, the doctor had torn the infant's brachial plexus, the nerves connecting the shoulder to the spinal cord. The injury resulted in Erb's palsy, leaving Wilhelm's left arm paralyzed and 6 inches shorter than his right arm. Not all of his injuries, however, were quite so obvious. In 1863, at just 4 years of age, Wilhelm attended the wedding of his uncle Bertie in England. The young Hohenzollern prince made his appearance wearing a full Highland costume, complete with a small dirk. As any 4-year-old would, Wilhelm became restless during the ceremony, but what he did next was anything but normal. Wilhelm got so unruly that his 18-year-old uncle, Prince Alfred, told him to quiet down and behave himself. That's just when Wilhelm gave the world a preview of his future belligerence. The young prince drew his dirk on Alfred. Stunned, Alfred attempted to subdue the royal rugrat, only to have the little monster bite him on the leg, but someone still worshipped the ground he walked on. Despite the growing knowledge of Wilhelm's abhorrent behavior and ill temper, one person remained blissfully unaware. His grandmother, and the matriarch of just about every crown in Europe, never had a bad word to say about her eldest grandson. As far as she was concerned, Wilhelm was a clever, dear, good little child, the great favorite of my beloved Vicky. Wilhelm's mother always blamed herself for her son's deformity. Nevertheless, she insisted that the future Kaiser must appear strong and capable. Despite his protestations, she forced Wilhelm to learn to ride a horse. In his poor condition, he fell off repeatedly, only to have his mother hoist him back in the saddle, weeping and in pain. The ordeal drove a wedge between mother and son, and it was only going to get worse. Wilhelm's tutor had an outsized influence on him, indoctrinating him in the Prussian way of autocratic rule. Under this influence, Wilhelm openly pushed back against his parents, particularly his mother's liberal British values. As he grew older, he began to suspect that his parents were more British than German, and thus couldn't be trusted. Wilhelm's deformity haunted him for his entire life. He had to pose strategically in paintings and pictures to conceal his left arm, often resting it on the hilt of a sword or holding a cane. For this, he placed all of his blame on his mother. An English doctor ended my father, he fumed, and an English doctor crippled my arm, which is the fault of my mother. As he was nearing the crown, at 21, Wilhelm joined the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards. It was there, amidst the strict, authoritarian, and hyper-masculine armed forces, that Wilhelm finally felt at home. In the Guards, he later recalled, I really found my family, my friends, my interests, everything of which I had up to that time had to do without. Wilhelm's position within the Foot Guards as a lieutenant had a drastic impact on his personality. Despite his poor temper and awkward social manners, Wilhelm had been polite and agreeable. However, once he donned his martial uniform that he almost always never took off, he adopted the swagger and brusque tone of a Prussian officer. But despite his new appearance, he had a softer side as well. In his youth, Wilhelm had fallen in love with one of his maternal first cousins, the Princess Elizabeth of Hesse in Darmstadt. He had gushed over the young princess, saying that she was exceedingly beautiful. In fact, she is the most beautiful girl I ever saw. Princess Elizabeth's beauty seemed to have tamed Wilhelm's beast. At just 16 years old, Wilhelm vowed that if he lived long enough, he would marry her when she came of age. Even as he grew up, he didn't change his mind. While attending Bonn University, Wilhelm often snuck away and visited Princess Elizabeth under the guise of spending time with his Aunt Alice, all while writing countless love poems to her. Fate, however, had something crueler in store for him. Finally, in 1878, Wilhelm mustered up the courage to ask his younger cousin for her hand in marriage. For reasons that we may never know, Princess Elizabeth turned Wilhelm down flat. Then, she would later marry into the Russian imperial family instead, compounding his existing jealousies. He fulfilled that wish when he became engaged to Princess Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein, aka Dona. However, his family objected to the match as, even though she was a princess, her father was merely a duke, not an actual sovereign. Wilhelm had at least one powerful person on his side. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck supported the match for his own political reasons. He had, for years, been fueling Wilhelm's alienation from his parents in the hopes that, when he ascended to the throne, he would be far more amenable to von Bismarck's political goals. Between Wilhelm's insistence on Dona and Bismarck's political machinations, the marriage went ahead. The relationship between Wilhelm and his parents would never be the same. Wilhelm and Dona had a happy marriage for the 40 years between 1881 and Dona's early demise in 1921. Together they had 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter. There was one thing that always brought them together. Dona loathed Wilhelm's mother almost as much as he did, and given what happened next, Bismarck was about to seriously regret endorsing their marriage. In early 1888, Wilhelm's father Frederick III finally ascended to the throne. There was just one problem. He was severely ill. After just 99 days as Kaiser, Wilhelm's father succumbed to throat cancer, paving the way for Wilhelm II to claim what was his, the German Empire. Unfortunately, there was one man and a continent standing in his way. From the second the imperial crown touched his head, Wilhelm was determined to rule as well as reign. For Bismarck, who had been chancellor under Wilhelm's 2 predecessors, this was a departure. Bismarck had hoped his years of influencing Wilhelm would make him easy to manipulate as Kaiser. Almost as soon as he ascended to the throne, Wilhelm clashed with the Iron Chancellor. Wilhelm considered Bismarck's foreign policy to be too weak and careful. The new Kaiser imagined a more muscular German empire. That young man, Bismarck lamented, wants conflict with Russia, and would like to draw his sword straight away if he could. I shall not be a party to it. He wouldn't have to. After Bismarck attempted to undermine Wilhelm by forming a new coalition, the new Kaiser met with the Iron Chancellor at his estate. No one knows exactly what the two hotheads said to each other, but the explosive outcome left little to the imagination. Wilhelm stormed out of the meeting in a huff, while Bismarck wrote a blistering letter of resignation. There would be no one standing between Wilhelm's erratic behavior and an unsuspecting continent. From the outset, the half-German side of him was at odds with the half-English side. He was wildly jealous of the British, wanting to be British, wanting to be better at being British than the British were, while at the same time hating them and resenting them because he could never be fully accepted by them, unless he could build a better navy. That, at least, is what he thought. As a child, Wilhelm had confided to his uncle, the Prince of Wales, that what he wanted more than anything was a fleet of my own someday. So, when the British Navy upstaged his meager German fleet at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, the new Kaiser Wilhelm II became determined to outdo his cousins, sparing no expense to outshine his British cousins. Despite Wilhelm's envy for the British side of his family, Queen Victoria always treated him with courtesy and tact. The same, however, could not be said about his other British relatives. In particular, his uncle Bertie, the future King Edward VII, refused to pay Wilhelm the proper respects even after he became Kaiser, prompting Wilhelm to refer to him as the Old Peacock. But even bigger family feuds and scandals loomed, some that even threatened his reign. Shortly after he ascended, Wilhelm's sister Sophia of Prussia married the heir apparent to the throne of Greece, but she caused a stir when a year later she announced that she would be converting from Lutheranism to Greek Orthodoxy. The shocking move infuriated Wilhelm, but no one could have predicted how dramatically he would overreact. Upon hearing about Sophia's intention to convert to Greek Orthodoxy, a heavily pregnant Dona summoned her. She conveyed to Sophia that Wilhelm would not tolerate her conversion and said that he would go as far as to ban her from Germany. When Sophia replied coolly that it wasn't any of her business, Wilhelm's wife completely lost it, with tragic consequences. Sophia's cool defiance sent Dona into an apoplectic fit. Her hysterics were so intense that she went into early labor with her youngest son, Prince Joachim. Wilhelm wrote to their mother saying that, if his infant son didn't survive, his blood would be on Sophia's hands. Thankfully, the boy survived, but Wilhelm should have been more concerned about his own life. In March 1901, during a visit to Bremen, Wilhelm almost had his number punched. While riding in a coach to the railway station, a sharp iron object came flying at his face. The object struck him below his left eye, leaving a gaping wound 1.5 inches long. What was even more shocking, however, was Wilhelm's reaction to the attempt on his life. One of the witnesses to the incident, the chief of the naval ministry, recalled Wilhelm's curiously calm reaction to the incident. The wonder of it is that our all-gracious Lord felt neither the object flying at him, nor in the rain the copiously flowing blood. He reported that everyone else around the Kaiser seemed to notice the injury before he did. The same official remarked, on the temple or in the eye, the blow could have been devastating. Fortunately for Wilhelm, however, the sharp object had simply been a fish plate. Moreover, the assailant proved to be little more than a madman, but just around that corner, there were even bigger scandals that Wilhelm couldn't ignore. Between the years 1906 to 1909, Wilhelm's administration became embroiled in a scandal that nearly toppled the crown from his head. The journalist Maximilian Harden published scandalous accusations of gay activity involving ministers, courtiers, and army officers in Germany. The most disastrous accusation, however, was a lot closer to home. Harden's biggest target was Wilhelm's closest friend and advisor, Prince Philipp zu Eulenburg. As the scandal raged on in the papers, Wilhelm's closest allies found themselves embroiled in trials and shameful resignations. Some even took their own lives. But when Eulenburg had to resign over the scandal, it proved to be more than Wilhelm could take. After Eulenburg's resignation, Wilhelm experienced a nervous breakdown. The dramatic reaction has led many historians to believe that the last German Kaiser was a deeply repressed gay man who never came to terms with his feelings for Eulenburg. Even before that scandal ended, however, Wilhelm cooked up another one. In 1908, Wilhelm gave an interview to the London-based newspaper, The Daily Telegraph. During the interview, he attempted to improve the already strained Anglo-German relationship. But his usually prickly personality, erratic behavior, and emotional outbursts got the better of him. What ensued was an antagonistic rant against the English that brought Europe one step closer to all-out conflict. During the interview, Wilhelm made comments such as, "You English are mad, mad, mad as March hares." He then went on to blame the French and the Russians for attempting to coax Germany into a conflict, and asserted that Germany's naval buildup was aimed at Japan, not Britain. The fallout from the Daily Telegraph crisis was worse than Wilhelm could have imagined. Powerful people in Germany demanded his resignation. While he remained defiant and retained his crown, his once unshakable confidence took a severe hit, spiraling him into a depression from which he never fully recovered. With the fatal attack on Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Europe burst into all-out conflict, and the battle lines were drawn along the roots of Wilhelm's family tree. The Kaiser, ever jealous, blamed it all on his cousins. He lamented, "To think that George and Nicky should have played me false. If my grandmother had been alive, she would have never allowed it." Nevertheless, he was determined to make his cousins respect him. August 1914, with the fighting freshly underway, Wilhelm made a bold and confident prediction. He proclaimed, "I am firmly confident that, with the help of God, the bravery of the German army and navy, and the unquenchable unanimity of the German people during those hours of danger, victory will crown our cause." Wilhelm's optimism, or bravado, was short-lived. Just 3 months after his confident declaration, he convened his cabinet to deliver grim news. Germany couldn't win, but that's not the worst part. Despite this realization, he allowed the fighting to continue for another 4 brutal years, giving rise to a less than flattering epithet. Just when his country needed him most, Wilhelm retreated into the shadows. Historian John Roller described this time in Wilhelm's reign, saying, The man who in peace had believed himself omnipotent became in conflict a shadow Kaiser, out of sight, neglected, and relegated to the sidelines. But he could not escape the consequences of what he had started. By late 1918, when it became obvious that Germany was going to lose, support for Wilhelm had completely collapsed, both inside and outside of his borders. Finally, when President Woodrow Wilson insisted that Germany do away with the monarchy before any peace negotiations could begin, Wilhelm had no options left. He agreed to step down, and his year only got worse. The same year, as the world hobbled through the last of the fighting of World War I, the devastating Spanish flu pandemic took hold, and Kaiser or not, Wilhelm was not immune. Adding insult to injury, Wilhelm contracted the flu and fell terribly ill. Even as he recovered, his hold on power continued to slip away. Given what happened next, succumbing to the flu would have been a kindness. Wilhelm's reign officially ended on November 9, 1918, when he abdicated after losing the support of his last allies. He swiftly boarded a train, crossing into the Netherlands and effectively going into exile. His departure marked the end of the German Empire and the centuries-long rule of the Hohenzollern dynasty, but he wasn't in the clear yet. With all of the carnage from World War I, the victors wanted someone's head on a pike, figuratively. In a striking display of familial disdain, King George V of England wrote of his cousin Wilhelm, branding him the greatest criminal in history. Despite his harsh words, George V opposed calls to hang the Kaiser. Fortunately for Wilhelm, Europe was wary and there was little appetite for further bloodshed. Although British authorities formally requested his extradition to face justice, they secretly urged the Dutch to refuse the extradition order. The Netherlands, seeking to avoid entanglement in the post-conflict retribution, happily complied. Wilhelm purchased Haus Doorn, a palatial manor in the Netherlands, where he stayed for the remainder of his life. Remarkably, the Weimar Republic allowed him to take an extraordinary amount of personal belongings: 23 railway wagons of furniture, 27 filled with various packages, one with a car and another with a boat. However, not every member of Wilhelm's household adjusted to civilian life as easy as he did. His youngest son, Prince Joachim, fell into a deep depression following the loss of his titles and status. After his wife divorced him, Joachim made the tragic decision to end his own life. Somehow, Wilhelm made it all about him. Wilhelm received the news of his son's demise with anger instead of sadness. Furious, he lamented that the oaf should have done this too, to us, and especially to his mother. His half-hearted attempts to conceal the nature of Joachim's demise from Dona failed, and she passed from grief shortly thereafter. But a deposed Kaiser is never single for long. Only months after his first wife's passing in 1921, Wilhelm found love again. He received an unexpected birthday greeting from the son of the late Prince Johann Georg Ludwig Ferdinand August Wilhelm of Schönheit-Kauhelat. Wilhelm fell for the boy's mother, Princess Hermine Roos of Greitz, whom he invited to Dorn. By the end of 1922, the 63-year-old former Kaiser had tied the knot to the princess, some 30 years his junior, despite protests from everyone around him. In all fairness, she seemed to have a calming effect on him. For the last 20 years of his life, Wilhelm maintained a semblance of his former regal lifestyle. He entertained guests of high social standing and kept abreast of European affairs. He even grew a beard and allowed his iconic mustache to droop, adopting a style reminiscent of his cousins, King George V and Tsar Nicholas II. Wilhelm hoped that the rise of the Third Reich might restore his family to power. However, after the Night of the Long Knives, he said, "We have ceased to live under the rule of law, and everyone must be prepared for the possibility that the Third Reich will push their way in and put them up against the wall." But Wilhelm was nothing if not changeable. When the Third Reich began racking up early victories at the outbreak of World War II, Wilhelm changed his tune. After the Netherlands surrendered, he wrote to the Führer saying, "I congratulate you and hope that under your marvelous leadership, the German monarchy will be restored completely." Utterly bemused, the Führer commented to his valet, "What an idiot." As the Third Reich continued to score victories across Europe, Wilhelm sent more telegrams to the Führer, all without response. Feeling jilted, he wrote to an American journalist, bragging that the brilliant leading generals in this conflict came from my school. They fought under my command in World War I as lieutenants, captains, and young majors. But by that time, bluster was all the deposed Kaiser had left. In June 1941, the former Kaiser succumbed to a pulmonary embolism. Surprisingly, the Third Reich respected his wishes that his body not be taken back to Germany until and unless the monarchy was restored. Wilhelm was buried in a mausoleum on the grounds of Haus Dorn, where German monarchists still gather today to pay their respects. In the end, it was Kaiser Wilhelm II's all-consuming jealousies and turbulent temper that drove Europe into one of the bloodiest conflicts in its history. As one historian wrote, Wilhelm was desperate for applause and success. As Bismarck said early on in his life, he wanted every day to be his birthday, romantic, sentimental, and theatrical, unsure and arrogant, with an immeasurably exaggerated self-confidence and desire to show off. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.